Good morning, dear colleagues. The warmest greetings to you from Moscow, and please let me to continue the talk on the boundaries of knowledge, and I begin with the banal point that professions also have their borders. In medieval and early modern Europe, these borders were established by guilds, schools, and corporations. Each of them had their own rules and sphere of activity. Today, I am going to speak on a person who managed not only to increase the capability of his profession, but to establish its new borders in three aspects, that is, the identity of surgery, its social status, and language. Meanwhile, these borders could differ much of those we are accustomed to now. Thus, surgeons sometimes formed the single corporation not with therapists, as it may seem logical to us, but with barbers, whereas the professions of therapist and surgeon were strictly segregated. The historians have several versions of why it was so. François Quesnay in the 18th century believed that the division between medicine and surgery arose in the era of university education and was largely due to the influence of the Church. Medicine was studied by student clerics who, because of their status, could not treat women and so-called shameful diseases and could not visit the sick at home. This version is often linked with the idea that the Church forbade bloodshed, Ecclesia abhorret ad sanguine, which was declared by the Council of Tours in 1169. Consequently, the clergy could not do any surgical operations. The medical historians nowadays have put forward another version. It is associated with a particular position of medicine among the academic disciplines. Theology and law were purely intellectual disciplines which did not involve any manual labor, while medicine, and especially surgery, required such skills. However, having become a university discipline, medicine received the status of a science based on natural philosophy, while surgery took a different path. Universities rejected surgery as belonging to the sphere of pure manual labor, and it was firmly entrenched with the rank of a mechanical art, not science, and if there were not a science, there was no place for it in the universities. Anyway, the doctor's profession was structured as to require a university education. A doctor was considered a person who had graduated from a university and received a license, unlike a surgeon who studied as a craftsman. The medical environment was socially heterogeneous, and social barriers prevented to draw the practical conclusions from the obvious idea that surgery was an integral part of medical treatment. That is why the learned doctor's attitude towards surgeons remained dismissive. The treatment of physicians to surgeons in this period somewhat resembled the relationship between doctors and paramedical staff. When we deal with France of 16th century, it can be observed several groups of those who executed surgical activity, and the lowest level of them was occupied by so-called barber surgeons who combined such kinds of working as shaving, cutting hair, but also bloodletting, tooth extraction, fractures, dislocations, abscesses, and sometimes even wound management. That is why they were in demand also as battlefield surgeons. And to this very corporation, surgeons of very low status, belonged Ambroise Paré, royal surgeon to 4 kings of France, who seemed to be one of those who tried to destroy and re-establish the borders of his profession. Pare was a famous person who played an important role in surgery, and we can find his name in all the manuals for medical history. He was no doubt one of the best surgeons of his century. He practiced as a battlefield surgeon in the last Italian wars and in the religious wars in France. Thanks to him appeared new operations, primarily the most revolutionary method of gunshot wounds management, using ligatures instead of cauterization. He also invented many new instruments, elaborated new techniques of obstetrical intervention, worked out the artificial limbs, and made many other things to multiply the professional skills of surgery. Indeed, the Renaissance became a time when surgery was not only expanded its professional application and scope, but also sought its place among the sciences. The fact that surgery gained new areas required a different attitude for surgeons, and it is not coincidence that in this very time the surgeons' voices began to sound more loudly. In the 15th, 16th centuries, a huge number of treatises on surgery were issued with detailed descriptions of operations and instruments, and thanks to these books we can get a sense of what surgery was. To better understand the identity of surgery, I suggest you to take a glance at two popular books. The first one is written by Ambroise Paré's contemporary and compatriot Jacques Delechamps, one of the most well-known surgeons of this period. It is French Surgery, Chirurgie Françoise of 1569. The table of content in it is, the table of content of it is classic for a surgical manual. The subjects described in it are fractures, wounds, abscesses, and other surgical operations. Another example is one of the most popular books on surgery, which was written earlier but re-edited many times. It is Practice and Surgery, La pratique et chirurgie by Giovanni da Vigo, which became the medical bestseller of the 16th century. Da Vigo's work was published in Latin, French, German, Italian, and English for almost 2 centuries, and was thus very widely available. It contains such subjects as anatomy, abscesses, anatomy, abscesses, wounds, morbus gallicus, which is syphilis, fractures, ulcers. And now let us turn to Pare. His oeuvre begins with a large theoretical introduction which include the main points of Galenic therapy: natural things, elements, temperaments, humors, spirits, different ways of curing, symptoms and indications. Naturally, after these subjects come the traditional surgery as anatomy, wounds, tumors and fractures, and in these things Pare had no equal, having proposed, as was mentioned above, many new techniques and methods. But we also find in oeuvres such subjects as delivery, mental illnesses, poisons, a unicorn. Pare tried to prove that such an animal does not exist in reality. Monsters. Actually, it is the first attempt to describe the pathogenic cases from the point of view of medicine, to classify them and to explain their causes. All these things do not constitute the sphere of surgery so much that Pare considered it necessary to explain his position. "You should not get angry," he said, "that I crossed the line. I didn't want to do that, but there is a close link between the sciences. Thus, when I speak on fevers, somebody can think that I pretend to be a doctor, because this area is not related to the knowledge and practice of a surgeon, but it is impossible that some part of a body is injured and the wounded does not feel anguish inside. So it is necessary to study fevers for curing the external things." Indeed, the doctrine of fevers is the cornerstone of Galenic therapy. Pare stressed that a surgeon should take fevers into consideration. For example, when a patient has fever, a surgeon should not make bloodletting, as it is dangerous. These ideas in a text on surgery caused irritation of both doctors and surgeons. The Paris medical faculty held the fort against surgeon practitioners for more than a century. For example, one of Pare's numerous opponents was Etienne Gourmelen, a professor of medical faculty in Paris and author of Apology against Pare. He blamed him primarily for crossing borders of his craft, describing things which are absolutely unnecessary for a surgeon. It would be enough, Gourmelen argued, to describe anatomy, tumors, fractures, and other operations, but he, Pare, begins discoursing on lofty matters of philosophy and medicine, such as elements, humors, faculties, spirits, as it would be appropriate for this profession to discuss the mysteries of natural philosophy. Similarly, Gourmelen writes, for teaching of how to extract a newborn from mother's uterus, he speculates on sperm, on menstrual blood, on causes and signs of conceptions, or on periods when a baby gets his appearance, his movements before the birth, etc., as if a musician wishing to teach a child to play lute or any other instrument would give him a long lecture on harmony of heavens according the doctrine of Pythagoras. This example shows clearly that the question of professional borders was largely discussed, and above all, it is a question not of the skills required, but also the rank of surgery among other medical disciplines. So, Pare had to make a revision of what surgery was. First, from his point of view, surgery is an equal branch of medicine. Medicine, according to Pare, consists of three parts: surgery, curing with operations; dietetics, which cures with healthy lifestyle; and pharmacy, which cures with drugs. Every part of medicine is equally honorable, but surgery interferes into the human body only in cases of emergency, when the illness can't be treated by itself, as luxation, trepanation, amputation of a gangrenous limb, or dissecting an abscess. Moreover, this part of medicine, surgery, according to Pare, is the most ancient, for it is described by Homer in the Iliad, and the most difficult of all the three. But, Pare claimed, they are closely connected, and that is why in ancient times one and the same doctor was a therapist, surgeon, and apothecary. But as the world grew, Pare writes, and human's life became shorter, and the medicine was divided, and a single person could not understand and execute it perfectly because of the complication of his art. But where are the limits of surgery, and who draws the borders between therapy and surgery? Pare stated that the greatest physicians of antiquity, such as Hippocrates, Galen, Avicenna, and others, practiced both therapy and surgery, and there were no rules or prescriptions to study one separately from another. These references to ancestors lead Pare to one more problem. No wonder that Pare, as most of surgeons, did not know Latin, and his works, as well as many other surgical treatises, were written in French. This fact also gave rise to the university doctors to criticize him. The medical Latin seems to perform two tasks. Firstly, since antiquity, the medical knowledge was regarded as mysterious art which should be hidden from laymen. But in the 16th century, Latin ceased to be a lingua franca of scientific communication as vernacular languages were increasingly adapted. From this point of view, medical and surgical books in vernacular lead to the opening of medical knowledge for the general public. In some aspects, it was found immoral when it deals with midwifery. In other aspects, it could be dangerous if medicine and surgery would fall into the hands of the illiterate. Nevertheless, Ambroise Paré claimed that medicine would be glorified if translated into French. And I ask, he writes, whether the philosophy of Aristotle, the medicine of divine Hippocrates and Galen were obscured and impoverished with their translation from Greek into Latin or Arabic, as Averroes, Ephedius, and other well-known Arabs did, or whether Avicenna, the Arab prince of medicine, did not translate many treatises of Galen into his language, jargon, he writes, jargon, in order to adorn his country with medicine. So why I am not permitted to write in French language, which is more noble than any other? It would be noted that solving the problem in this way, Pare makes new borders instead of the old ones. In one sense, this increasing vernacularization of surgical texts increased the spread of knowledge, since they could now be accessed by not university-educated medical practitioners. But the absence of universal language of science made the obstacles for surgeons of other countries to get acquainted with Pare's works. That is why, soon after his death, appeared the translations of his work into Latin, that is one of the first edition and one more, then to the other European languages, that is the English version, and even later into Japanese. This fact proves that Pare's works remained in demand for centuries. That is the illustration from a French version, which was copied in the Japanese edition. To summarize, we can consider Pare as a real Renaissance man whose distinctive feature was universalism of knowledge. Not only his oeuvre was a kind of encyclopedia of medical knowledge, including surgery, therapy, midwifery, and many other subjects, but he personally was establishing, not only in words, but in his deeds, new medical borders. Thank you.